I'm joined by two guests well placed to give answers to that. Andrew Wilson is the author of The Globalization of Political Technology and Professor of Ukrainian Studies at UCL's School of Slavonic and East European Studies. Welcome. His book refers to the Russian term for the professional engineering of politics, and with it the creation of a global industry selling a range of manipulation techniques. And Daryna Harib is the information manager at the Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation. It is part of the National Defense Council, established in May 2021 as Kyiv became increasingly concerned about Russian information operations. So it was up and running when the invasion began. Daryna, let's kick off with you. Give us two examples of disinformation you are seeing right now in Ukraine and what you're doing about them.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for having me here, and thank you for this great opportunity to speak on these things. Now we're witnessing of the evolving landscape of Russian disinformation. Mainly their tactics and techniques are now became more sophisticated. They were at the beginning of the full-scale invasion. So as we see right now, it's increasing. For two examples, I will talk about the increasing amount of deepfakes that Russia are producing in the psyops against Ukraine. And then I think the interesting thing I will talk about the second, it's the information alibis that Russia is using, trying to shift blame on Ukraine on their terroristic actions. So as we will speak about the deepfakes, mainly at the beginning of the wars, they were really poor quality, and everyone, like even children, will understand that it's made with artificial intelligence. But for example, there is a great example of the really good, sophisticated deepfakes that Russia is producing. It's against our previous commander-in-chief, Mr. Zaluzhny. It was in the beginning of November 2023 when his colleague, was assassinated, and then Russia produces deepfake where Zaluzhny allegedly told people of Ukraine to go out streets to protest against the president, and for the military staff, he says allegedly to not take criminal orders for the Ukrainian authorities. So it's mainly was doing to spread panic and like to discourage Ukrainians in our victory. So this message was firstly appeared in one of the Telegram channels, which is actively used by Russian special services to provide a sort of psyops and such sort of information throws into information society. It really looks like one of our really big Telegram channels, Ukrainian Telegram channels. So it's like mainly trying to mimic to their appearance and to people be like more willing to read the information about it from this. So in Ukraine, it was really high. It was a really high influence in the beginning, but we as a center mainly providing all the information really quickly and like to debunk all the things and said that is fake, what it was the first source of information, that it spread it, and so on. So it was not such big influence in the end of this operation. And then Russia uses again and again, but Ukrainians are really like resilient to the deepfakes. They understand that it's the thing Russia is using against us. And another thing, it's an information alibi. So mainly Russia started the information campaigns trying to say that Ukrainians will do this and that, and then they made it themselves. For example, it was the case with our prisoners of war in Olenivka. So in the June 2022, in the Russian Telegram channels begins the messages where allegedly President Zelensky was like, gives an order to kill prisoners of war, or Ukraine will kill our prisoners of war. At that period of time in Olenivka was guys from Azovstal and Azov Brigade. And it was really massively spreaded. And then in the end of the June, Russia made this terrorist attack and killed almost 50 our prisoners of war, and more than 70 were injured. And then they started next campaign, so telling that it was made by the order of Zelensky to not give these prisoners were to speak or to give some sort of evidences against Ukrainian authorities. So this massive campaign started and going, but like it was really good also debunked with our means, and also other actors also give their respective expertise. And then it was a really huge analysis made by CNN, so they like given all the references why it was made by Russians. It was really obvious. So yeah, mainly these two things are really sophisticated actions and tactics that Russia is using right now against Ukraine. So I will stop here.
Fantastic, thank you. Fascinating. Andrew, give us a wider political context. You have written about political technology. How do you look at that concept in relation to Russian efforts in Ukraine in the information space?
Right, well, unrealistically, I'll try and make 5 points in 5 minutes. They're all based on my reading of the Department of Justice, US, indictment of propagandist Ilya Gambashidze and his people. Because in the appendices to that indictment, there are these leaked minutes from the Kremlin, which show you how the propagandists work. And they all refer to each other by their first names: Stas, Sofia, Ilya, which is Gambashidze, and Sergei, which is Kirienko, the deputy head of the presidential administration, but here the what is called the curator of politics in Russia. So number one, size and ambition. Millions spent on a network in the USA. I was just in Moldova, I could talk about that as well, where the Russians are spending at least 200 million euros in an operation to influence the elections on this Sunday, in 6 days. That is 3% of GDP. Right? Imagine that scaled up in Britain or France or Germany. Why? Because, point number two, political technology in Russia is a service industry. Right? Gambashidze is really young, all the people around him are new. This is a new generation of people who have their own companies, think tanks, except the Russian word for think tank is fabrika mysli, which means manufacturing factory of thought. Right? Not the kind of Western meaning at all. And they're all feeding off these very, very generous spetsfundi, a kind of obshak, a kind of common feeding trough of hundreds of millions. Thirdly, in terms of size and scale, what the Russians always try and do is amplify through local networks. So in America, it was this Tenet Media company. In Moldova, it's the Shaw network, named after a fugitive oligarch, which is huge. Ukraine's good fortune, and this actually explains the timing of the war in many cases, is that they were able to dismantle the main secondary network controlled by Viktor Medvedchuk just before the full-scale invasion. Fourthly, this faces both ways. Right? Political technology in Russia is both a way of domestically controlling the population and creating external propaganda. Right? Russia propagandizes its own population. This is why there's so much money for these companies to do both things in both directions. And lastly, the language used by Stas, Sofia, Ilya, and Sergei in this report is really indicative and interesting. It's not really a kind of horizontal distinction between fact and truth. They use phrases like, let's add some real facts to complement the fake facts that we've created. Right? It doesn't make sense in our perspective. The words they use are pre-reality. Right? Being is becoming. By the act of our propaganda, we are changing the world. And the second term that they use is augmented reality. Right? We are creating this reality to which we add all the bells and whistles, the deep fakes or whatever. So I'll stop there. Beware of both types of Russian reality.
Fascinating. very briefly, we'll open it up in about 5 minutes to the audience, but Daryna, talk about briefly civil resilience is clearly an important concept here. What form does it take in Ukraine?
So mainly, I think for us, one thing is when you're living in constant danger of dying of Russian missile, you will be really not pay attention to all this, I will not say bad words, but like things that Russia are producing in our information space. So you are really critical, your critical thinking is really high, because like you really understand that's all the things that they are trying to manipulate in our info space and trying to produce the narratives only for our information space. It's really not the case for even thinking about it. And also, I think the other important thing is provide really verified, really like checked, updated information for our people. So we, as the Center for Country and Disinformation, have mainly accounts on each of every social media, trying to get as much target audiences as possible. And we even made list of, Telegram is the main source of information, unfortunately, in Ukraine. And we even made a list of verified Telegram channels, so people can check their sources of information that they're reading. And also we provide them some so-called blacklist. So channels which are or Russian or like trying to be Ukrainian, but mainly provided with Russian propaganda. So also that's the thing that they can, like going through their channels that they like scrolling each of every day on their phone, like and check whether they are target of Russian propaganda or not. So I think now we are have much resilience as we had in the beginning of the full-scale invasion, but yeah, we're trying to do as best to update our population that mainly on daily basis you are facing Russian propaganda and you need to be prepared and you need to be aware and you don't need to be like the victim of the things.
Fantastic, thank you. Andrew, very briefly, you touched upon this. Different messages the Russians have for the Ukrainian community and the international community. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Russia doesn't have a Ukrainian equivalent of this big network that exists in Moldova, but it does work through Telegram and other channels. So it isn't able either to focus on or to shift fundamentals. Right? So 90% still support the war aims, are opposed to any kind of bad peace or major territorial concession. And you can't shift that. But what you do see a shift in, unlike abroad, unlike in America, where the narrative is sometimes about Ukrainian extremism, but more effective narratives about Ukraine being a failed state or totally corrupt. The narrative shift that you've seen in Ukraine since February 2022 is more about these kind of exploitable tensions between Zelensky and Zelensky. You've seen an increase to about a quarter of Ukrainians saying there are major tensions between politicians and the armed forces, and a similar kind of shift in people saying the West isn't going to do enough to help us. Right? So I mean, these are kind of crucial supporting elements to all that more existential stuff about the war and its aims. So you can see Russia having some softening around the edges, but not shifting the big things.
Fantastic, thank you. I'd like to open it up to questions now. Does anyone have a question? The lady at the front. And I'll take 2 or 3, so.
Thank you very much. Dr. Nelly Kirilova, PhD in International Security from the European Security and Defense College in Brussels, and here LSE Ideas. So I have questions for both of you. Professor Wilson, how would you comment the possible attempts of maybe Western interference into the case of Ukraine in Ukraine? Do you think that only Russia is interfering, or maybe there are also others? I'm asking this because my research is on competition for influence between different actors. So whether the West interferes in Ukraine. And then to Daryna, my question is whether the Ukrainian population is accepting with critical views the Western information, or whether it thinks that everything is correct and right, because I met some cases of this. Thank you.
Lovely. Can we take some more questions as well? We'll do this gentleman here.
Hi there, I'm Adam Cooper, Director for Digital Conflict at the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue in Geneva. My question's for Daryna about the cooperation you receive or don't receive from social media platforms themselves. In the West, often this issue is kind of framed around the platforms which are most prevalent in our society, so around Meta and X, but you noted Telegram and the fact that that's the dominant platform. Have you sort of essentially given up hope that the company can be incentivized to do anything different, and therefore the only response is to kind of provide a list of verified channels, or is there something that you would like to see done to change those incentives?
Fantastic. And I'll take another one. This man over here.
Hi, Ian Bond from the Centre for European Reform. Question for Andrew. I wonder whether you could say something about the use by Russia of nuclear threats. Does that come into the category of manipulation? And are there better ways to respond to it than the ways in which we have responded so far? Okay. I think I know the answer to that, but I'd be interested in specifics if you've got any.
Okay, Andrew, briefly, and then we'll turn to Daryna.
Okay, first question. Is the West engaged in the same type of information war as the Russians? Certainly not the same. We are engaged in strategic comms, stratcoms, possibly not enough. Sorry to use your Moldovan example again, but because we are talking about Ukraine. But the EU isn't even involved in the referendum campaign on the benefits of being in the EU. Right? They think it's too political to get involved. So in some sense, the West could do more. It could be in terms of open strategic communication. In terms of the covert, we don't have these big political technology service industry operations because we don't have that kind of industry. I can't tell you what our secret services are doing, unfortunately. Ian's question, I will credit a student who did a really good dissertation on the correlation between, and this is all quantitative analysis of online content, particularly in Telegram and in official statements by Putin and Medvedev, a really strong and obvious correlation between setbacks on the battlefield and upticks in Western assistance to Ukraine. Right? Then you get the nuclear threats to try and disrupt that. That correlation is clear. The policy implications are difficult. Right? This is something which has clearly a political correlation, but obviously is something that we have to take seriously. My personal opinion, we should put more emphasis on the former than the latter. You know, this is clearly political in its timing.
Daryna.
So yeah, I will first answer to the second question. So we have a really good cooperation with social media platforms, especially with Google, Meta, and TikTok. So we are working with them and trying to detect all the like actors who are behind some pages, or even blocking some sort of things on the. So we can only block on the territory of Ukraine, but it's really also important to block and not to spread all the information. Unfortunately, with the Telegram, we didn't have any connections, obviously, but we are trying to be as much open as possible and trying to provide as much information as possible for our population, trying to really like pointed which of the pages or which of the channels are really constantly producing Russian disinformation, even when they're trying to be looking like Ukrainian and like in some sort of, for example, 10 messages, it will be like 6 up to 7 Ukrainian, pro-Ukrainian messages, but then 3 of them will be totally pro-Russian. And like when you're like reading and scrolling, you can be a target for this thing. And the first one, like the critical views about the West, mainly Russia uses all this narratives about like West will betray Ukraine and everything, but I think it's the main point is like trying to decrease the amount of help that we get, and I don't think they're trying to push it all over again, and we see a bunch of disinformation campaigns only based by this narrative, but I think they will not get to this point.
Fantastic. We're going to have to finish it there, I'm afraid. What a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much. Now, if you could leave the stage, and I will